Welcome, everyone. We are delighted to be learning with you here today. This is Women in Rabbinic Law and Narrative with Dr. Shana Strauch Schick. This class will explore the competing views that are found with regard to women's obligation in various mitzvot as expressed by the Babylonian Talmud versus rabbinic texts from the land of Israel. We will see that many of the assumptions we often have with regard to women's exemptions are found only in the Bavli, while Eretz Yisrael texts present far more inclusive positions. However, when it comes to aggadic texts, the reverse is often the case. Bavli narrative texts often showcase female subjects that are absent from the earlier Eretz Yisrael parallels. Dr. Shana Strauch Schick is a lecturer at Bar-Ilan University. She holds a PhD from the Barnard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies. Her first book is Intention in Talmudic Jurisprudence, Between Thought and Deed. Without further ado, Dr. Schick, please.
Thank you so much, Noah. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for the opportunity to teach this class. This topic is actually the subject of my current monograph, my research, and a book that I want to write. So you're all really helping me here to, not just give over the material, but, to think about it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights, your readings, and, we can build this together as well. So, and also it's just be helpful to me to see what's a good order to do this in, and hearing what you think, what works and what doesn't work, that would be so helpful as well. So as Noah said, in this class, we're going to be looking at a few things that many halachot from which we often think that it's axiomatic that women are exempted or excluded from. We're going to see that often that's actually unique to the Bavli, Eretz Yisrael text, and I say that purposely because when I say Eretz Yisrael, I mean the rabbinic texts which were produced in the land of Israel during the Talmudic period, which includes the Talmud Yerushalmi, but also it includes, aside from the Mishnah, the foundational corpus of rabbinic literature, but the Tosefta, a work which was parallel, roughly parallel to the Mishnah, give or take, as well as works of Midrash Halacha. Those are Tannaitic texts from the times of the Mishnah. The same rabbis of the Mishnah have different views about many halachot vis-a-vis women's obligations. So, but we're also going to look at aggadot, and as Noah said, see the opposite is the case. So I'm trying to organize this and do this in a systematic manner because there's a lot to cover. So the first thing that we're going to talk about in this class are the ways that the Bavli exempts or excludes women. And if I talk about it, of course that has a lot of meaning if we talk exempt versus exclude. Exclude sounds a lot more active than exempt. So it's something to think about. Is it excluding or is it exempt? They happen to be exempt from something. So, those two words are not interchangeable, clearly. They have a different meaning to them. But what we're going to see today, we're going to start with one of the ways that the Bavli exempts or excludes women from halachot. And that's going to be the first few classes, and then we'll see the next part of the course. We'll see how texts in the land of Israel are much more inclusive, or perhaps that's what we'll explore. And then the last part, we're going to look at the aggadot, but of course, there's going to be overlap because in many Talmudic texts, Aggadah and Halacha, law and narrative, are really merged together. So what we're going to do today is what I call the logic of exclusion. We're going to look at three patterns I have observed in how the Bavli excludes women from halachot that in a earlier text from Eretz Yisrael, women were originally obligated in. So I have found that the Bavli accomplishes this in 3 ways. So 3 ways that the Bavli excludes women from legal discourse. The first way is that there'll be a debate in a Mishnah or a Tana or a Tanaitic text. And a Tana, just some basic information. A Tana that's the name of the rabbis who comprise the Mishnah. If you look at that root, Mishnah Tana, they're the same root. Just Tana is the Aramaic of the Hebrew Mishnah. And Mishnah is from the biblical term, Vishinantam Lebanecha. Vishinantam, we shall teach, but Vishinantam, it comes from that root, like Shane in Hebrew is a tooth, to sharpen, to go over, to really drill something in, to learn it. So that's what Mishnah and Tana, so these 2 words are related. So there'll be a debate in a Mishnaic or a Tanaitic text about whether women are included. So one view will say yes, the other view will say no. So in the Eretz Yisrael text, that's EY, in some cases, so the Eretz Yisrael text will follow the inclusive view, but the Bavli will follow the exclusionary view. So that's one pattern. So there's a debate, and so they just go with the one which says women are exempt. So that's the first pattern. The second pattern is that the Bavli will modify or add to an inclusive Eretz Yisrael tradition. So it will just reword it in some way, without saying it's rewording it, and thereby have now a ruling which does the opposite of what the Eretz Yisrael tradition originally did. Now, is this conscious or not? We will see the cases. And the third pattern is the Mishnah presents one exclusionary view. Women are exempt from, X, from saying a Shema, for example. And the Bavli, let's do the Bavli first, will accept this ruling. Like, yeah, that's good. Here's a proof text. Whereas we'll see in the Eretz Yisrael text, Shalmi will challenge it. They really is that really true? Should this really be the case? So we're going to see we're going to see each of these. Now, the first one, where the Mishnah, where there's a debate in the Mishnah or Tanaitic text, the Eretz Yisrael text follows the inclusive view, the Bavli follows the exclusionary view. Even though I put that one first, I actually want to come back to that one hopefully next week, because it's a lot more involved of a text than what I want to start with. And instead, what I want to begin with is the second category, because these are pretty straightforward. And that way, and this way, we're going to get to a few different sugyot, text, and that is the second pattern I have observed, which is the Bavli modifies or adds to an inclusive Tosefta tradition. So I gave you in the chat the sources. So if you can open it up, if anyone has a problem, please let me know. But it'll be there, and I also have the text in this PowerPoint as well. So, so this first category that we're going to look, what I've labeled my second category, is where the Bavli is modifying or adding to a Tanaitic tradition, which included women in a given obligation. And in this way, the Bavli excludes women or exempts women, however you want to see that, through the appropriation of a Tanaitic tradition that initially was inclusive. So first we're gonna start with the section one involving Torah's daddy. This is something we're gonna come back to. So it's a very interesting tradition. It's a Braita being a tradition from the time of the Mishnah, but it's not in the Mishnah. Okay. Okay. So, well, if everyone sees my screen, then I have I am also sharing all the text on this PowerPoint as well, but you have the text in, that way you can keep the text in the sources that I gave you. So this first text, this first tradition, it's a Braita that appears in two different places, in two different Eretz Yisrael texts, I should say. And it's a Braita. It's a Tanaitic tradition in Masechet Brachot, in the first tractate in all of Shas. And in this halacha, it's concerned with people in a state of ritual impurity, what they are and are not allowed to learn. And why that's even a question, because it's in Masechet Brachot, in Tractate Brachot, it talks about that a man who becomes impure through a seminal discharge, or the term in Hebrew is he's a Baal Akeri, he has ejaculated. There was a decree that he's not allowed to learn Torah, or say, holy words, Davar Shebekidusha, without first purifying himself. So that is a man who experiences a seminal emission and therefore is in a state of ritual impurity. But the Baal Keri, the man who ejaculates, is not the only person. That's not the only form of a bodily ritual impurity. So what about other people who are in such a state? Are they allowed to learn Torah? So let's just read this Tosefta together. So it says, Hazavin. So Hazavin, Azav, that is a man who becomes impure as Azav. I mean, it's a biblical impurity. It's not really clear what it is, but it's some sort of abnormal seminal discharge. So Azav, Zavin, so a male, Zav, Hazavot. Hazavot is a woman with this abnormal menstrual flow. It's not a menstrual flow, it's some sort of a vaginal blood flow that's not normal. So Azav, a male in a state of ritual impurity, Hazavot, a female in the state of vaginal impurity. Vehanidot, that's a menstruating woman, which also biblically that makes her ritually impure. Vahayoledet, hayoladot, a woman who gives birth. According to the Torah, according to biblical law, a woman who gives birth is in a state of ritual impurity. 7 days if she gives birth to a boy, 14 days if she gives birth to a girl. So these are all Zavin, Zavot, and Nidot, Hayoladot, 4 people in different states of bodily ritual impurity. And 3 of these are women. What does it say about them? Mutarim likrot b'Torah. They are permitted to read from the Torah, the Chumash, Banaviim. They can read the books of the prophets, Uviketuvim, and they can read writings, meaning they can read all of Tanakh. They can learn Tanakh. But that's not all they can do. Lishnot b'Mishnah. They can also recite Mishnayot. Bamidrash, they can learn Midrash. Behalachot, they can learn law. Uva agadot, they can learn narrative Midrash. Midrash generally refers to Midrash halacha. It's the expounding biblical verses to learn laws from. Agadot are the Midrashic narratives. So they are all allowed to do these things. Ubale Kerim, Asirim Bichula. Whereas a Baal Keri, a man who is pure due to ejaculation, he's not allowed to do any of these. Rabbi Yossi says, well, he can recite his routine halachot, as long as he doesn't say any Mishnah. Okay, so that is this Braita. And when, so what just looking at this breakdown, looking at this tradition, what is this tradition saying? What is the underlying assumption of this Mishnah? I mean, of this Abraita, sorry, it's not a Mishnah of this Abraita. The Abraita is telling you what you are allowed to learn, even if you're in a state of ritual purity. It says, what you're allowed to learn: Mishnah, law, Tanakh, Midrash, Agadah. What does that apply? What is this Tosefta basically saying? I know it's so hard to pick someone out, but that would imply that, this Braita makes pretty clear that, would you say from this that women studied all these things on a routine basis? If it has to explicate, you're allowed to learn this when you're pure, that would, it follows that it's likely that people learn these things normally. You only have to say what you're allowed to do during exceptional times if this is what women normally did. Now, of course, I'm saying women because, as we will get to, Torah study is a domain from which women are, throughout time, thought of being excluded from. And, why that is, where we are going to get to that topic. But this makes it pretty clear that, if you have to explicate what women in the state of Tumah are allowed to learn, and talking about all these things, that would seem to indicate that it's because they were normally learning these things. And have to say, and don't think that has to stop when she is in a state of purity. And when this tradition appears in the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Talmud of land of Israel, let's see how it appears here. So Tani means it's taught. It's a Tanaitic tradition. Zavim v'zavot, nidot v'yoladot. So Zavin, the male with this impure, abnormal seminal discharge. V'zavot, females with an abnormal blood discharge. Nidot, menstruating women. V'yoladot, women who have given birth. Korim b'Torah, they can read the Torah. Shonim b'midrash, v'halachot, v'hagadot, and they could recite midrash and laws and agadot, again, narratives, ubal karyastor b'chulhan. But a man who is impure due to ejaculation, he is prohibited to do all of these. So the Yerushalmi really brings down this Braita, as it appears in the Tosefta. It leaves out Nevim and Ketuvim. Okay, I think that can be indicated by Torah. It leads out Mishnah, but that may be just the implication of halachot, of midrash and halachot and agadot. Maybe not, but it's not. It really just seems to really capture the essence of the Braita and the Tosefta. Now you might think, well, of course, what's the big deal? Because when we turn to the Bavli citation of this tradition, we find something very different. Okay, so whereas this tradition, the list in the Eretz Yisrael text, Tosefta and Yerushalmi, is a list which primarily comprises females. So let's see what the Bavli does. So Detanya. Okay, so Detanya, this points to that is now citing a Tanaitic tradition. So Tanya, again, it's the same root. Tana, Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah. So Tanya means it was taught. So first it brings a biblical verse. Shall teach your children, and then it says after that, so you teach your children. Then it says a day you stood before God in Horeb on Mount Sinai. Malahalan be'ema v'yira v'ratat v'zeyavkam be'ema v'yira v'ratat v'zeyah. So just like there, you were staying with fear and awe, and you were shaking. So too, when you're learning a Torah, it should also be with fear and awe. So mikan amru. So from here they say, hazavim v'hamitzoraim ubain al nidot. So azavim, that's a male. Zav, a male who is impure due to that abnormal seminal emission. Mitzoraim. Anyone knows what a mitzora is? Anyone? Mitzoraim is
a leper.
Exactly a leper. I mean, that's how the English, it is. It's not actually leprosy, but it's a mitzoraim. And what suffix is mitzoraim? Who is this, leper using? If it's a, that kind of plural ending, and Hebrew is a gendered language, who is indicated by mitzoraim?
Either masculine or a mixed gender group.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's either masculine or mixed gendered. Excellent. Now, as opposed to just going back to the Tosefta, where, if it's a vav taf ending, that signifies female. That can only mean women. So, zavim mitzoraim u'ba'in al nidot. What's ba'in al nidot? Someone who has intercourse with a menstruating woman. Ba'in al, who goes on. Interestingly, Hebrew has no verb for sex. Even in modern Hebrew, it's two different words that, two different words that, trying to form together to mean that. But there's no actual word for it. So there's all these different verbs in Hebrew which have the connotation. So ba'in al nidot, someone who's had sex with a menstruating woman, mutarim likro b'Torah v'nivim b'ketuvim. They are allowed to read the Torah, prophets and writings, lishnot b'mishnah, recite Mishnah, v'gemara, and they can also learn the Gemara, uvehalachot, v'agadot, they can learn law, they can learn narratives. Aval balei kerim asurim, but men who have, are impure due to ejaculation are not allowed. So let's just get these side by side here. So can anyone just point to what is the difference between how this Breita appeared in the Tosefta and the Yerushalmi versus how it appears in the Bavli? So our first category, Zavim, that matches up pretty well with Zavim. So that works. Male, abnormal emission, you got in both. But the Zavot, the Nidot, and the Yoladot that are in the Tosefta and the Yerushalmi, are they in the Bavli's version?
No.
Exactly, no. We don't have any of these females in a state of purity. Who do we have instead?
Other categories of men, it looks like. Exactly.
Now you could say mitzvah, maybe that, it's gender neutral, maybe that could be both. But who is it very clear is talking about ba'in al nidot?
Men.
Exactly. It's someone, we don't have nidas anymore. And menstruating women, now we have the men who have sex with a nida, a menstruating woman. So the females who appeared in the Eretz Yisrael tradition are absent in the Bavli's version of this Breita. And we have only men in states of ritual impurity. Now, there's a few other differences. You have Tanakh in both, Lishnot b'Mishnah in both. Okay, only the Bavli has a Gemara, but that makes sense because in the Tosefta there was not yet a Gemara, so that makes sense that the Tosefta wouldn't have that. And you have halachot and agadot, whereas you have, but you don't have midrash in the Bavli, which just makes sense because in Bavel they didn't do midrash. So you could see some of the geographical differences at work here too. They don't do midrash generally in Babylonia Whereas in Eretz Yisrael, they do midrash. So you can understand why maybe midrash would have fallen away. But we have this very striking case here, which this was long ago noted by Saul Lieberman in his Tosefta Kipshuta, but where you see that the original list comprised women, which, again, if you have to say, what are you allowed to learn when you're in a state of impurity, that would seemingly indicate that's because women normally study these things, and therefore they have to say, you are allowed to do so when you are impure as well. In the Bavli's version, there are no women explicitly enumerated on this list. Now, is this intentional? Or could you say, well, maybe, what's the other option? Maybe this is just a tradition that, was transmitted in Babylonia, and we cannot necessarily point to active reworking of the source. Okay, so we can't know for sure. However, this is not the only case of this phenomena. And I just want to kind of footnote right now that we are going to come back to women and the study of Torah later on. But for today, I want to focus on this pattern of an inclusive Eretz Yisrael tradition. And when it appears in the Bavli, it is not. So this is our first case. Now, maybe this is just how the tradition was transmitted in Babylonia, perhaps, but we find this in other cases as well. So the next example where we have an inclusive Eretz Yisrael tradition, or more in inclusive tradition, is in regard to the public reading of the Torah. So perhaps this is a text people have learned in the past, but with regard to the public reading of the Torah, it says in the Tosefta, and again, the Tosefta, I should just want to say a little bit, what is the Tosefta? It's from the time of the Mishnah, and it's a debate among scholars whether it predates the Mishnah. Was it like kind of a draft of the Mishnah, which then the Mishnah is like the later edited, streamlined version? So that's what some scholars say. Others say, well, no, actually, it's post-dates the Mishnah. It's the Tosefta. It comes to add to the Mishnah. So we added things that were not in the Mishnah. That's a second approach. A third approach is, they're kind of a parallel to each other, kind of parallel works that function in different ways, and that accounts for the similarities, but also the differences. So either way, we find in the Tosefta, the final on tractate Megillah, the following halacha says, "Hakol olim laminyan shiva." Does that mean everyone can count for the 7, can go up for the quorum of 7? And what 7? That means people who read the Torah, the aliyot. What does that mean? An aliyah, because you're called up to read, and there are 7 aliyot, and there are 7 going ups. So, and back, and in this time, when someone got an aliyah, when they were called up, it wasn't just saying, Baruch Hu Hashem HaMivarach. You also lamed, you also read that aliyah as well. So it says everyone can go up for the 7, who read the Torah scroll. Afilu isha afilu katan, even a woman, even a child. Okay, that's the first line. Ein nivi'in et ha'isha l'krot le'rabim. They do not bring a woman to read the Torah for Rabbin, for many, or for the public. Now, I actually just want to take this away for 1 second so we can just focus on this for a minute. These 2 lines, let's read that again. Everyone can go up to read the Torah, even women. They don't bring women up, or they don't bring women to read for the public. So these two lines seem to be in a conflict with each other. Even women can go up to read the Torah. They don't bring women up to read for the public. So I'm just wondering if anyone has some thoughts about how to read these two lines together. I mean, are they just, you can say, okay, they can afflict, and what can we do? Or does anyone see any way or ways to read these two lines together as not necessarily standing in a conflict? Just wondering if anyone has any thoughts about it. Sorry, someone's saying. Okay, so maybe a woman can read if she's called. I like that, meaning, well, what do you mean if she's called but not in other circumstances? Can you, Alana, can you elaborate on that? Meaning she can't read on someone else's behalf. Like you can, so she can read, but not for other people, meaning that she can like lend the Torah for her own obligation, but not doing it on behalf of someone else. Is that what you're saying?
Perhaps she can read just for women.
Okay, so that's one. So yeah, maybe that's one way to read it. She can read for other women, but not for men. I think that's one way to read it.
She could read not for many men, but just for, one or two men.
Yeah, I think that's also and especially that's really picking up on Robin. She can, read, but just not for many people, many men. Okay, I think that's a really plausible way to read these two lines
and
together.
Then I remember once coming across a something that said that the woman was able to it wasn't reading the Torah, but it was more saying I forget what the term is, but if she did it from the women's section instead of being called up to the bima in the men's section.
So that's it, and that's an interesting read also, because now you're picking up on mivi'in. Maybe we just don't bring her. Mivi'in means to bring. We don't bring her in. What does that mean, bring her in? So maybe it could be we don't bring her into the men's section. Now, of course, we should just
I think that had to do with saying Kaddish, I think, or
that's. But I think that works with it here also. Now I should just say, maybe we'll have time to do this topic. There actually in Talmudic text, there's no actually explicit reference to a separate women's section. But I think you can say like maybe she's, maybe if she's not already in the shul, we don't. If a woman's already there, she can read the Torah, but we don't like explicitly bring her in if she's not there to read from the Torah. And that's. Picking up on that mivi, we don't bring her in. And I think also what you said, maybe it's about Robin, it's about numbers. She could read the Torah, but maybe she shouldn't read it for many people, for the whole congregation. So I think either way, and is any other possible ways to read this? Oh yeah, I mean, I think also something you were just saying. The Or Zarua, who is a medieval Ashkenaz commentator, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Reb Moshe of Vienna, he suggests that that if she's going to be the only one reading, a woman should not be the only one reading. She should not be the sole reader. So that is. That's another way to, people have tried to make sense of these two lines, which seems to conflict. I think what's, clear either way is that technically a woman's allowed to read. Women can read from the Torah, and then maybe there's some, there's some, mitigating circumstances, maybe not for many people, not if she's the only one, if she's not there, but so there's these like mitigating factors which might curtail it, but technically, reading the Torah is something which is open to all people, even children as well. Now, when we see how this breita, let's see how this breita. Oh man, how that just happened. Sorry, I just lost it. When this breita appears in the Bavli, let me get it out. Here appears somewhat differently. Let me just make this bigger for everyone. So what does it say? Okay. So Tanu Rabbanan, which again, Tanu, when you see that verb, tanu, that usually is a marker to tell us this is a Tanaitic tradition. Remember from that same word, Mishnah. So Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. Hakol, Lila, Minyan, Shiva. So far, so good. Everyone can be called up for the 7, or everyone counts for the quorum of 7. Filu katana, filu isha. Even a child, even a woman. Now, just what difference do you already notice? I mean, it's almost exactly the same, but in the Tosefta,
they flip the order.
Exactly. Now you might say, okay, not a big deal, but we're actually going to see this in other cases as well. Where in the Eretz Yisrael text, women came first, then came the children or the slaves, the usual group. In the Bavli, the women will not be first. Okay. So maybe it's just how the tradition was transmitted in Babel. But when we see this happen multiple times, it might listen that maybe it was up, in a attentional pattern. So yes, that's the first change. So everyone can count, everyone can read the Torah. Aval amru chachamim isha lo tikra b'Torah. But the sages say a woman should not read from the Torah mipnei kavod tzibor, due to the dignity of the congregation. So again, let's just look at these side by side again, and the first line makes it clear that we are dealing with it's the same tradition, but obviously there's a difference in the second line. And how would you categorize this difference? So again, the Tosefta is we don't bring women in to read for the many, versus the Bavlis. The sages say women do not read from the Torah because it is a slight to the honor of the congregation, or due to the dignity of the congregation. So how would you categorize the difference between these two traditions? How would you, It's, as we said before, the Tosefta, it didn't seem to be like a categorical exclusion. Technically women can lay in, and then maybe don't bring her in if she's not inside the shul, or if there's a lot of people there, she shouldn't read for them. It was more like there's these mitigating factors which limit it. But it never categorically rejects that possibility of women reading from the Torah. Now, the Bavli's formulation, first of all, just that opening statement about Amru Chachamim, the sages say. Now, it's unclear if that's like a determinative statement or is one which is more of a recommendation. However, the statement is much more determinative. It's much more definitive. Isha lo tikra b'Torah. A woman does not read from the Torah. And we also see the Bavli adds this new principle, this new addition of kavod letzibor. Now again, what is kavod letzibor? Is it a subjective addition that a community, a community can choose to forego their honor, let a woman read for them or not? The fact that there's so much literature written on this, and it's something which is, certainly not without its, multiple opinions and controversies to this day, attest to the fact how, not easily resolvable or not clear that this is, sure, it's fine. It's about kavod tzibor, you can just forego it. So the Bavli's statement, is definitely much more, really puts the brakes on women's ability to read the Torah than does the Tosefta one, at least in its formulation, unless someone has another thought about this. Anyone else have any comments about this they want to share? Okay. So again, we see this case where
I just have one thing to say. I mean, I'm assuming the Talmud Bavli was written in a Middle Eastern country, and perhaps the culture was less open to women as it was because of this of it being Babel. And this whole idea of kavod hatzibur, it's like, okay, you can't have a woman read because some of the men probably couldn't do it themselves, so you're not going to show them up by having a woman read. It's like part of the culture. They're like,
yeah, I mean, I
bending to the
absolutely.
culture.
So we're going to talk. Sorry, I just lost my place here. We're going to talk about. I mean, is there a larger cultural thing going on? I mean, this idea of where kavod tzibur comes from. There are definitely there's roots for it in the Mishnah. I mean, everything is in the Middle East. So Israel and Babylonia is modern day Iraq and Iran. So it's a neighbor to Eretz Yisrael, but Eretz Yisrael was Greco-Roman Palestine. It's under the Roman Empire, and Babylonia. Sorry, I see your question. I mean, hold on a second. Babylonia is under the Sasanian Empire. So these are very two different cultures. Neither are feminist cultures by any stretch of the imagination. We will see in different places how maybe the larger milieu and its attitude to women and what women were able to do. Do we see that reflected in these rabbinic texts as well? I mean, it is something we're going to have to think about. Why is the Bavli? Why does it exempt or exclude women from more things than does Eretz Yisrael? And it's also something to think about. Well, how do we even think about excluding people? Making people obligated in its halachot versus solving them. Is it is the land of Israel more feminist to women, or is it just a more strict culture everyone has to do a lot? It's interesting to think about, but it's fun. And I see there's a few other questions, so we'll get to them in a minute. But it's definitely clear that kavod tzibur, that is something that's only here in the Bavli. We'll see, I guess next time, a precursor to it in the Mishnah. But this principle is a Babylonian, a Bavli principle. Okay, and hopefully by the end we'll be able to see, or at some point, do the larger cultures have something to do. Now, sorry, there's a few questions in the chat. Was this okay? So Alana, was that question? Was this outside Babylonian influence? Was it making it for the culture to maintain? Not the tradition, since it's opposite Eretz Yisrael tradition, right? I mean, what accounts for the more exclusionary view in Bavel? Could it mean in Sasanian Iran, women had very limited power on one hand. On the other hand, that's also not completely the case. And we're going to see that in Sasanian Iran, women and men were equally had equal opportunities to go and study in what's called the Bedistan. That was the places of priestly study. Says, whoever can learn better goes. Doesn't make a difference, if it's a man or the woman, and whoever can watch over the date will stay home, whether it's the man or the woman. On the other hand, in Sasanian Iran, they also had very strict laws against menstruating women that make Jewish laws seem tame. I mean, women who were menstruating had to be isolated in a windowless hut where they were fed minimally, forced to, they wear the shrouds of the dead, can have windows because they could make something tameh pure just by looking at it. And they certainly couldn't be near the sacred fire. And so fires were holy for the Zoroastrians, so it was certainly, a lot of limitations placed on women as well. And the Greco-Romans, and we know, men are citizens, women aren't. There are individual women, but in the Roman Empire, but certainly we don't think of it as one in which women had, it's talking about equal rights is very anachronistic, but it's something we have to. I'll talk about what accounts, or something to think about what accounts for these differences. Okay, now someone else has a question. Okay. If you want to unmute yourself with a question, yeah. I'll ask you to unmute. If you have a question.
Right. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
So, one, our congregation, which is considered quote unquote modern Orthodox, the rabbis have consistently been from YCT. It has been decided effectively, as I understand it, because I wasn't on the committee, but that if the congregation has deemed it and voted that they are totally comfortable with women doing whatever reading, which is very limited, that it's not a question of Kavod HaTzibur, because the Tzibur is not embarrassed or put upon him anything. On the other hand, I heard a story from our community just now that a rabbi effectively was told that not to have an outside minion because that reflects poorly upon the respect for him, which to me is not logical, would be the kindest way. And therefore they close their out to a minion, which means if you cannot, it's not masked. Almost nobody in my area is masked.
That's very
so I'm just wondering about this Kavod HaTzibur. It sounds more. It sounds a little like the Rabbinic in Israel, Kavod HaTzibur.
Well, yeah, it's a whole vast literature. And what is Kavod Tzibur? And what is the dignity of the communities? Is it something which is subjective to a community? Is it something, which we have these objective standards? And there's, what are the examples where it comes up? Again, this only comes up in the Bavli. Now, I should just say from the outset, so why all these things that we're learning we've only heard of from the Bavli's perspective? Because halacha has followed the Bavli. That is, that's how history and the development of halacha unfolded. The Babylonian Talmud is what became a dominant Talmud. It was disseminated to the diaspora by the Geonim, that was the rabbis who flourished after the Talmudic period. And the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, went likely from Babylonia, Italy to Sepharad and Ashkenaz. That is, the hypothesized trajectory of how the Jewish communities spread out, whereas the community in Eretz Yisrael, there always were Jews who remained in Israel, after the fall of Roman, after the Christianization of the Roman Empire. It was harder and harder for a Jew to live there. There was a lot of persecution, but there were still Jews there, but it was a very weakened community. Many went to Babylonia. And, until the Crusades, there were, these small Jewish communities still in Eretz Yisrael, but it wasn't the dominant one. And that's why the halacha of the Bavli is, what became the halachas. That's why when you're talking about what does a shul do, it's talking in terms of this Babylonian Talmud category. What's Kavod Tzibur? And again, this is a concept that's not in the Eretz Yisrael text. It's in the Bavli, but the Bavli is what ended up determining the halacha. Now, again, whether a shul can decide, we forego it, we don't mind, that is, there's different opinions about that. We have time for our final case where we have this pattern of there's an inclusive Eretz Yisrael tradition that appears in the Bavli in a more exclusionary way. This final example is, believe it or not, tzitzit, women wearing fringes. Okay, so it says. So now we have the Sifrei. The Sifrei is a work of Midrash Halacha. Midrash Halacha is it's also a work from the time of the Mishnah. It's rabbis of the Mishnah, and it's a work which derives the law through Midrash, expounding biblical verses. So there's Midrash Halacha on the book of Exodus, Shemot, on Bamidbar, and on Devarim, Numbers, and on Deuteronomy. So Sifrei Bamidbar is the Midrash Halacha on the book of Numbers. And that's where we have the command to wear fringes. It's the third paragraph of Shema. That's what it says. God said to Moses saying, speak to the children of Israel, and they shall make for themselves tzitzit. Yes, Kabbalah Tzibor is in the Bavli. It's a concept that's only in the Bavli. And here I'll just give you all the occurrences of it. It's in Bavli Megillah, Bavli and Bavli Gittin, Bavli Sota. I can give you that list in a moment. Okay, so it brings this a verse where God tells Moshe, tell the children of Israel to make for yourself tzitzit. That's the pasuk, that's the verse. Put quote there, and then says the Sifrei, af hanashim b'mashma. Women too are, applied by this verse. Okay, women too are included. Rabbi Shimon poter tanashim min hatzitzit. Whereas now Rabbi Shimon, this is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he exempts women from tzitzit, from wearing fringes. Mipnei shemitzvat taseh shazman grama nashim piturot. Because this is a positive commandment dependent on time, from which women are exempt. Shazal klam Rabbi Shimon. For this is the principle. Rabbi Shimon said, Kol mitzvah taseh shazman grama noheget b'nashim ina noheget b'nashim. That all positive time-bound commandments mean any command which is, only performed at a certain time. Men are obligated, and it applies to men. It doesn't apply to women. So we have this two opinions. The first opinion holds women are included in the obligation to wear tzitzit, and then the position of Rabbi Shimon, which seems to be the minority position, because the first position is brought anonymously. It's not a tribute to any single sage. It's just like the anonymous opinion. Whereas Rabbi Shimon has he has a countering view that women are exempt from wearing tzitzit because he holds it's bound by time. And when we look in the Tosefta's formulation of the law, it seems to follow the first view. What does it say? What's an example of a positive command that's bound by time? You go in Sukkah, sitting in the Sukkah, that's time bound. You only sit in the Sukkah during the holiday of Sukkot. Lulav, you only take, the lulav during Sukkot, bound by time. Utefillin. Now, why tefillin, phylacteries is bound by time? That's a debate because it's not worn on Shabbat. Okay. So what are examples of commandments which are not bound by time? Kigon aveda, returning a lost object, that applies anytime. You have to do that day or night, and Shabbat, holidays, shiluach hakain, sending away the mother bird to take eggs from her nest, that applies anytime. Ma'aka, putting a fence around your roof so no one falls off it. That applies anytime. Vit tzitzit. I'm wearing fringes. This is included in examples of things which are not bound by time. And again, we have our opposing view of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon poter Hashem mitzitzit. But Rabbi Shimon, he exempts women from tzitzit because he holds it's a positive time-bound command. So the fact that it says Rabbi Shimon, he holds it's bound by time, and therefore women are exempt. So what does that mean? That the first view of the Tosefta, which holds that tzitzit is not bound by time, would obviously hold that women are therefore obligated in tzitzit. And that is the view of the Tosefta. I mean, that's how the halacha is. The law is brought down in the Tosefta, and again, when the Breita is brought in the Yerushalmi, we find it is as appears in the Tosefta. What's an example of a positive time-bound commandment? Sukkah, shofar, lulav, tefillin. All these things, that we saw before, plus more. You also added a shofar here. All these done in Rosh Hashanah. What are mitzvot that are not bound by time? Kigon avida. Returning lost object, shluch a king, sent with a mother bird, makah, and again, important for us, tzitzit. And again, it cites the Tosefta, Rabbi Shimon poter Hashem mitzitzit. But Rabbi Shimon exempts women from tzitzit because he holds it's a positive time-bound command. Okay. Now the Yerushalmi, so it just cited the Tosefta. It's now going to discuss it a little more. So now it has a discussion on this Breita. So Amar Le, so they say Rabbi Shimon, Ina Tamodimli. Amar Le Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon then says to them, so it has something added that's not in the Tosefta. Ina Tamodimli Shemitzvah Seishras Man. Rabbi Shimon says, don't you agree with me that this is a time-bound command? Garment you wear at night is exempt from putting tzitzit on it. Okay, so we have Rabbi Shimon in the Yerushalmi cited as supporting his view, but then we have a response. Amar Rabbi Hila. Tamon de Rabbanan, Shekain imayu meyachadot lo yom ulalayla she chayavet bat tzitzit. So Rabbi Hila, who is a third generation Amora from the land of Israel, he responds, no. If you had a garment which was designated layom ulayla for both day and night, he chayavet bat tzitzit, then you would have to wear it. So what does that show? No, you're wrong, Rabbi Shimon. Tzitzit is not only worn during the day, it can be worn at night. And if it can also be worn at night, what does that tell you? It's not bound by time. And if it's not bound by time, what does that mean? That women are obligated in tzitzit. And that is how Yerushalmi Sugya ends, with Rabbi Hila having the final word, and Rabbi Shimon's view seems to be relegated to a minority opinion. We have the Breita in the Bavli, and what does the Breita say? Tana Rabbanan. So again, we're reciting a Tanaitic tradition. What are positive time-bound mitzvot? Sukkah, lulav, shofar, b'tzitzit. There's no Rabbi Shimon here. There's no dissenting view. Rabbi Shimon's view has forged with the first anonymous view and become the position in the Bavli, the one and only one. Now, elsewhere, it does give voice. In a tractate Menachot, it does give voice to the fact that this was a debate, but this is, really the attested view in the Bavli. So again, in the Bavli's version of this Breita, there's this Breita, this tradition. There's no debate. It presents only one opinion anonymously, which includes tzitzit in its list of time-bound positive commandments, and hence an obligation from which women are excluded or exempted from. And again, there's no indication it's a subject to debate. So we have here, we've seen today is 3 cases where we had, Torah reading, the study of Torah and wearing tzitzit, that the Eretz Yisrael text were very clear that women are obligated in these things or able to do these things. And then when that same tradition appeared in the Bavli, it appeared in a modified way, which really curtailed or diminished or excluded women from that originally obligation, from the original inclusive obligation. So again, we can't know for sure, is this a purposeful reworking, or is it just the way these traditions were transmitted in Babylonian? I mean, the fact that this occurs a number of times, and we're going to see another example of this, another would seem to suggest that this, if it's not purposeful, it does say something about the stance of women with regard to obligations. Yes, sorry, over time.
I have a question.
Yes.
What's the basis for the ruling that Nashim wrote in mitzvot that Shazman Grama?
That is a very excellent question, and that's actually, another case of an original, modification of in the Bavli of Eretz Yisrael text that is not exactly, was more inclusive. So Elizabeth Shanks Alexander has a wonderful book on this. Highly recommend it. It's called Gender and Time-Bound Commandments. I'll send you a link to it. And she argues that in Tanaitic text, there's no categorical exclusion. There's no principle of mitzvah seishas mangraman Hashem pituro, that women are that there's no a class of mitzvot that women are categorically exempted from. This is not a category. Mitzvah seishas mangrama appears in Tanaitic text. She shows or argues as a description of certain mitzvot from which women happen to be excluded from. But it's not the reason. And in fact, even if you ever look at the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, on the list of mitzvah sheishos mangrama, there's more exceptions to the rule than mitzvot which actually follow the rule. And, when you look at Tanaitic text, when it talks about mitzvah, which we would consider time-bound, the reason women are piturot are generally for, case-specific reasons. So I think she makes very compelling case that originally that wasn't, again, it wasn't this prescriptive category. It was rather a description of a certain set of halachot, but it was not the reason for the exclusion. And in the Bavli, it becomes this categorical rule, which prescribes, halachot from which women do not do. And then it also, takes on that new meaning of, well, why are women exempt from time-bound mitzvot? Does that say something about the nature of women? In fact, that, and then all the stuff maybe you've learned and heard. So, you do see, we just read a Tanaitic text, which had Rabbi Shimon say, it's a mitzvah seishas mangrama from which women are piturot. So, I recommend you reading her book, so there are some very compelling reads in it. But yeah, so, it's not so clear that is, this real categorical prescription. And as I said, even looking at the Rambam, there's a lot more exceptions to the rule than things which conform to the rule. Now, okay, there's a question in the chat. where does the glory of women is inside come from? What does happen when women appear b'tzibur wearing fringes? So, the Vilna Gaon, the Gra, he writes on the commentary in the Shulchan Aruch, really the Yerushalmi says women, he writes in a very terse way, but really basically what he says is, yeah, of course the Yerushalmi women can wear tzitzit, but, the Bavli says women don't. And that's what we find. That's what the subsequent, commentators and halachic deciders, the poskim went by. So you have the Maharil medieval tshuva, a medieval responses say, if women wears fringes, because most women don't, she's violating yuhara, like arrogance. Although he does mention the wife of a rabbi who did wear. Rav Moshe Feinstein, when he writes about it, it's kind of like, it's awful, but if a woman does not, whatever. Like, it's kind of like what a friend of mine says, fake right, go left. In the end, it's like, yes, it's off, he kind of, gives a lot of rhetoric, like, oh my gosh, should it be done? But if someone does, it's not such a big deal because it's really, in the, it's in the Yerushalmi. Now, the way, I'm not like arguing to do one thing over the other because, the way halacha has developed, it has gone from the Bavli. And that is, that is how halacha has been decided very often. And these things also have sociological and cultural meanings in communities. So, in some places, wearing fringes for some communities might be like a super masculine thing because of just the meaning that has taken up in that certain community. Now, why is that? You're going to see Mishnah would also, exempt women from hearing the shofar and saying Shema. And yet women do these things and we don't even think otherwise. There's nothing weird or, not feminine about it. So it's interesting the things which have taken certain communal meanings and why that is. But certainly it's not, what we see here, that was not inevitable. And, did women actually go around wearing tzitzit in land of Israel during late antiquity? We don't know, but it's certainly, one can make a case that they did, but we don't know. We don't have the voices of women. We don't have the text produced by women, so you don't know. But when you read the Sifrei, Tosefta, and Yerushalmi, one could imagine that perhaps women did wear tzitzit in Eretz Yisrael. And what would happen today? That's often it's a different question. It's not necessarily a halachic one.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schick, for, as always, a wonderful class, and to everyone for participating in our learning community.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Just, your insights, questions, and participation. And I look forward to seeing you next week.